We've already done an episode on Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May, so now it's time to talk McCarthy, Nix, Penix, and Rattler today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, and welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who make Locked On NFL Scouting your first listen every single day. We appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started.
Joseph, happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
I have no other quirky. We get a lot of quarterback talk to get to. You have something.
I got a little something. North Carolina goes down last night.
2 out of 3.
Brother, State and Duke are going down today. None of the Carolina teams get to the Elite Eight.
That's your take.
It's my take. They're going down.
I like how the one that we talked about first was UNC Alabama, and we were so dismissive of, they won't lose. They'll be Bama.
Lost.
That's why it's called the madness, right? You just never know.
That's why people love it.
Never know.
All right. I got that out of the way, and we'll see if I'm wrong about that. We're talking quarterbacks, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, Spencer Rattler, Michael Penix Jr. We did the deep dive on the other quarterbacks. Now it's everyone else's turn today. Let's get into it, Kyle Crabbs. JJ McCarthy, the quarterback out of Michigan, 5-star recruit. And a big-time season for Michigan. I guess big time in terms of the success of the team. Maybe you wish JJ McCarthy was
in the spectrum of Michigan productive seasons at quarterback, though. I mean, it's still pretty solid.
Right. Some hype for McCarthy is potentially QB2. I think he's somewhere in the top 4 quarterbacks. We've done the deep dive, Kyle. When you watch the tape, what stood out to you?
I think this is a player that a lot of the conversation is rooted around the tools of the player. I'd still think he is rough around the edges. And it's tough when you have 650 pass attempts in 2 seasons combined, and some teams are giving a quarterback 80% of that in 1 season, right? So I think you have 2 seasons worth of starts, but really you have like 1.25 season worth of reps throwing the football. So I'm sympathetic to that for some of the rough around the edges type elements of McCarthy's game, but I think he has the requisite arm strength to have a plus arm in the NFL. He obviously has really good athleticism to get outside the pocket. I think he's judicious with his decision-making. There's guys that have low interception numbers because guys drop a lot of picks. I didn't think that was necessarily the case with McCarthy. I think he understood from a reading of a defense perspective when he had opportunities to be aggressive and when he didn't. And I think that's a really important line to walk for or trait to have for a guy who just doesn't have a lot of reps throwing the football versus the standard that you see in college football with some of these other teams.
I think it's a fair thing to point out with reps. We've talked a lot about with reps with recent quarterbacks, whether that's Anthony Richardson or Trey Lance. This is what I would say about JJ McCarthy. He only has 714 career passing attempts, but at least those are 714 career passing attempts in a pro style offense, right? Those are like legitimately good reps. And so where I think he maybe lacks volume in reps, they're good translatable reps. I mean, you're watching some of these other guys, you're like, man, is this all going to be manufactured scheme throws? Is he ever going to have to read it and rip it? Well, you get to see JJ McCarthy do that a lot. And I think there's a baseline level, kind of everything you're looking for, whether it's size, arm talent, movement skills, leadership. I mean, this guy has a track record of winning. I know that people will thumb their nose at that, but 27-1 as Michigan starter, 36-2 in high school, won a state championship, right? Or national championship caliber quarterback. There's just a lot to like here. And I think there's a lot of translatability to his game. I really appreciated some of those throws where you could see him drive the football, to the field on outbreaking patterns, right? You could see that. And those are Sunday throws. And so I really just enjoyed watching McCarthy, and more than any other quarterback that I watched, feeling like I watched a translatable skill set that works in the NFL. And he's only 21 years old. I think there's a lot of room for upward mobility as it relates to JJ McCarthy.
Those are the two biggest selling points, I think, especially when you contrast it with the other three names we're going to talk about today. Bo Nix started 60 games in college, I think. I think that's a factual statement, started 60 games. Michael Penix, what, 6 years in college football?
Yeah. Even Jaden Daniels is a 5-year starter, right? Like,
yeah. So you contrast that with, this is a younger player who has as many translatable reps to the NFL game, and the NFL's getting more spread-ish. We'll see if that continues. The league is cyclical.
Yeah.
But just to reiterate that point about reps, the last 2 seasons for JJ McCarthy, he's had 322 and 332 pass attempts. I'm not a math guy, but I can tell you that's 654. Michael Penix has over 1,100 the last 2 seasons at Washington.
Right.
554 and 555.
Yeah.
So from a volume perspective, you have youth, you have room to grow into as you get more reps. He's making the leap to the league at what feels like an ideal time for him as a player.
Yeah.
And then you get into the projection of where he may eventually end up landing. And you say, oh, by the way, he's not going to be QB1 going to Chicago. That looks like a better situation than it's been in a long time. He's probably not going to Washington.
Yeah, we'll see, right? Seems like Jaden Daniels and the brass Adam Peters there were dapping each other up pretty good at the LSU Pro Day. So,
which now you're getting into, is that a New England pick? Is that a trade down spot?
Oh, I'd hate McCarthy in New England. Don't do it to him.
Right. So I think that's, if he goes to Minnesota, we're over the moon.
Over the moon.
If he goes to New England, we're a little shell shocked. I think if he went to Chicago, we'd like the fit a lot, and then that's probably not going to happen.
Right.
Let's just be honest. So,
how about McCarthy weighing? Like, I thought his measurement at the combine of 6'2.5", 219. That was good. That was a really good number for him. I was nervous he might be in the low 200s. So,
and I'll say this for McCarthy and his skill set too. I was surprised to find out how quote unquote low the rushing production was. He feels like a more athletic player than the production the last. He has 500 rushing yards the last 2 seasons combined, but his average 3.2 yards per carry last season. And he had, for his career, averages 3.9 yards per carry. He feels like a more dynamic player with the ball in his hands and on the move than that.
I thought he played his part, right? Like, he was part of the team. And maybe you wish that he was more of a catalyst for all the success that Michigan's had. And as we kind of look at some of those growth areas, that I think you're wondering a little bit there. But I thought he did play his. Kyle's calling a timeout.
That's a really important point, because the conversation for JJ McCarthy feels like truck versus trailer, right? Is that a fair statement? The big argument is McCarthy and what he was at Michigan versus what he's going to presumably be asked to be in the league.
Yeah.
Realistically, what trucks exist in this draft class? Are any of these guys trucks from the moment they walk in the league?
I have too many questions about all of them to feel that way. I think there's guys that can be, and I think JJ McCarthy can be.
Right. And I think that's a very important distinguishment to make as we're talking generally very positively about JJ McCarthy.
For growth areas for me, I thought there were times where you need to find more touch on throws, finding the right weight to put on the ball, too many fastballs when I think a changeup was required. And then I did think he made some risky choices with the ball, especially for a guy that was like asked to play a part, right? Defense, we're going to run the ball, we're going to sprinkle you in. Like, I still thought that there was moments where I was like, man, that wasn't the time to kind of put it into harm's way. So there's things to develop here. But I like where he's at.
I agree that this is still a developmental player. I think the touch and the placement are the two biggest things for me. And that's in real time in a 3-dimensional plane. How is your body oriented? How are you trying to throw around defenders to put the ball in the right spot, and wait on the ball is a good way to put that. Are you able to pull the string on the ball? Some of that comes down to how your base is as you're trying to throw, whether you're throwing on the move. So I thought there was some accuracy lapses, and I think that's all around just continued game development that's required for him. And then the right pitch at the right time, I agree, is the other big thing for JJ McCarthy.
Not to do the Michael Penix conversation before the Michael Penix conversation, but some of that stuff's going to come up when we discuss him later on. But coming up next is Bo Nix, a quarterback out of Oregon that I'll say this, surprised me a lot after watching the film study. Excited to get into him in just a moment, so be sure to stick with us. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets.
Oregon / former Auburn quarterback Bo Nix, our next subject here. Finished third in the Heisman Trophy voting in 2023. Finished this past season for the Ducks. 4,500 passing yards, 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions in the Pac-12, in addition to an additional 6 touchdowns on the ground. Joseph, you said he surprised you.
Yeah.
In what way?
Wow. In a lot of ways. I was more impressed than I thought I would be with Bo Nix. I think you start off by quickly recognizing the full command that he has of that Oregon offense. And I think the Oregon offense certainly helps, right? There's a lot of production that I think is created through the scheme. I think, was it 30% of his passes this past year were behind the line of scrimmage? All right. So I'm totally aware of that. And I'm bringing that up for a reason. It's because I like how he functions within that, but it's the second reaction moments that get me excited, right? There's so much of that gives me a lot of confidence that he isn't just, okay, we're going to operate within the scheme and I can't do anything else, because I think he can. And I think that's very clear with second reaction, throws on the run. Those are major strengths of Bo Nix. Not to mention that he does have pretty good arm talent, that he is athletic. I love the way that he's able to operate under pressure and be calm. He has 131 passer rating under pressure. We're going to talk about Spencer Rattler and Michael Penix in just a moment, and they wish that they were half of that when it comes to passer rating under pressure. I'm not saying that Bo Nix doesn't have some struggles under pressure like any quarterback does, but I think not allowing disastrous moments to happen in those moments and being efficient when he does have a chance to get the football out and keeping those eyes down the field. I love that he's worked out the kinks, right? Like, we remember his first game against Oregon when he was at Auburn, and you're like, man, like, dude, you're a mess. Yeah, you're a mess. Like, so I think too much experience could be a bad thing, right? Like, there's a Kenny Pickett conversation to have here. But I like the steady growth that he's had, and I think that positions him well at the next level. He's got big hands, right? 10 and an eighth inch hands, which I think in a system that he's going to be asked to play at the next level, ball handling is going to be important. I think having those big mitts is going to matter. And I think he's got top end intangibles and leadership, tight release, like a very efficient mechanics. I see the path, man. I see the path for Bo Nix to be a good starter.
I am not surprised with Bo Nix, what Bo Nix was this year. I had good
things. Did you watch college football this year? Because that's a big difference between you and I.
Because I watched him over the summer, and how he ended last season. And everybody remembers 2022 Oregon Ducks and getting smoked by Georgia to start the season, right? It's like, oh, Bo Nix goes to Oregon, can't get away from Georgia, SEC football, ha ha ha. And then, like, you watch down the stretch in 2022, and you're like, dude, light bulbs kind of come on here a little bit. And then he took that strong finish and he applied it to a whole season. There's not a greater glow up in recent quarterback prospect memory than Bo Nix, what he was at the lowest points at Auburn versus what he has become now. And I said this when we did the mock draft. We talked about Jim Harbaugh saying McCarthy's the best at playing quarterback in this year's class. I'm convinced the quarterback who executed his offense at the highest level this year amongst these quarterbacks was Bo Nix.
I agree with that now that I've watched him.
And he had 3 years of on-the-job training as a chaos merchant at Auburn before getting into an offensive system that had some coherency in what they were doing. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I don't think it's a coincidence that pressure doesn't rattle Bo Nix at Oregon, because he saw like the real you-know-what at Auburn with like guys aren't where they're supposed to be. Guys are running routes in the same spot. Nobody can block for me. The pass protection's a hot mess, and I just got to survive. And now there's a coherency with this system that Oregon has been able to put in place, and the pressure moments don't seem as high pressure. And this is not to say that Bo Nix doesn't have his limitations, but if I think Shanahan-style offenses and what everybody's all excited about with Brock Purdy playing for San Francisco, right? Is It's like, oh, he executes the offense, but he's got a little something to him. You know, he can make something happen outside of structure. This is a guy that's actually got tools, and you put him in a system like that, you could totally see he's a better athlete than Brock Purdy. He's got a stronger arm than Brock Purdy. So not to make this a poo on Brock Purdy conversation, because that's not the intent. The intent is the pathway for Bo Nix in the right environment. Now, I wouldn't ask him to sit here and do a bunch of whole field reads and do a whole bunch of pure progression style passing and work 1 to 2 to 3, and then your checkdowns on the other side of the field and have to move your eyes all the way across the field. But you mentioned the ball handling. Oregon's really centric in their offense in ball handling in the backfield, get outside the pocket, throw on the move, crossing routes, deep post down the field. And then we work combats and flats to high-low to the side that we're rolling out to. And there's some Shanahan parallels with what that can be. And I think this is a player, thanks to the athleticism and the experiences that he's had, that can really, I think, be a significant starter for somebody in the league. But when you have as much experience as Bo Nix has, at this point, you kind of are what you are, right? I think that's the important thing. The appeal with JJ McCarthy is he's got the traits, and he executed his offense, showed a fundamental understanding of his offense and how to read defenses, and he's 21 and he's got room to grow. That ain't Bo Nix. So the warts that you see now are probably the warts that are always going to exist. I think sometimes his lower half, he kind of locks himself in for some throws and it impacts his accuracy. I think he has nice touch throws, but I think the consistency of placement when he has to throw with touch isn't always there. And you'll probably get a bonehead play every game. And it's just, if you're willing to understand that there's good and bad, and you're willing to put the right guidelines around him for how you want to run your offense, and you're able to put a supporting cast around him that has some explosiveness, because that was certainly a thing at Oregon between Troy Franklin, and I can't believe that their back tested as bad as he did in athletic testing, because he's an incredible player. You're probably going to have something here as a starting quarterback.
I went from being confused as to why we're talking about him for Denver, and then I watched the tape and I kind of understand exactly why we're talking about him for Denver. I think he'd be a worthwhile pick for them. I think for Minnesota as well, if for some reason they're not able to move up and get somebody else, like, yeah, that'd be a great spot for him. I think there's a path. Like, I can see it pretty clearly. I can see it more clearly than I can with some of these other quarterbacks.
I know I'm taking a second timeout. Would you rather spend 3 first-round picks for JJ McCarthy, or would you rather just draft Bo Nix?
So it's
for Minnesota. Minnesota specifically.
Yeah, well, I think that goes right into the conversation that you had about Nix is kind of who he is, and their ceiling with McCarthy.
First 3 years, you'd probably take Nix, right? But there's a long-term conversation there that's worthwhile having. If the quarterback hits, then you got to pay the quarterback. And if you got to pay the quarterback, who else are you able to keep on the supporting cast that's around the quarterback that help make the quarterback so successful?
Stick and pick Nix, or give it all up for McCarthy.
Yeah.
I might stick and pick Nix if I'm Minnesota and I have what I have in place.
Right. It's an important part of that
especially in the NFC, right? Like, especially in the NFC.
Yeah.
Okay, so we like Bo Nix. A fun development. It's an interesting place to be. On the other side of it, Michael Penix Jr., Spencer Rattler. So be sure to stick with us.
It's been a very positive conversation thus far.
Time to crash and burn.
Okay, so we'll do Michael Penix Jr. next, who just blew the doors off his pro day. Everybody's surprised this guy's an athlete. In part because he didn't really run at Washington, but he was a big time like dual threat guy when he first came to Indiana in like 2018, 2019. He could run. And now he's thrown the ball 550 plus times a season at Washington the last 2 years, putting up big time Buco numbers, had 2 top 10 Heisman Trophy winning finishes the last 2 years at Washington, and had Washington within 1 score of the national champions in the second half. I think it was right around the end of the third quarters when the party kind of came crashing down.
Unraveled.
Yeah. Just because they really couldn't get anything going against Michigan. So where do you stand on Michael Penix, who is a very stylistically different player than the two that we've discussed thus far?
I'd be concerned about investing in Penix and feeling like I had a legitimate path to finding an answer as a starting quarterback. I see some of the appeal. I think he's a very confident player. I like the way he at times can push the ball down the field, and there's a lot of explosive plays that you'll see on the film. I think he's got arm talent to drive the football outside the numbers, to generate velocity, to get distance on the ball. I think he can move off his spot. He can adjust his arm angles, gets the ball to his playmakers. I thought
Can we
Washington
adjust our arm angle if our arm angle is already like a
yeah. He does it. He's got some problems with it though. And I think that offense, that Washington scheme, man, they might have the funnest screen designs I've seen of any team in college football. And I think there's a lot to say about his path and his journey and the adversity that he's faced in college. And just kind of kept coming back and kept improving year over year. So like there's a lot to like there. That's where I go with it. I probably have a lot more to say about what makes me concerned about him.
I guess the identity crisis that I have with Michael Penix Jr. is this. The entire trend of the league is to avoid allowing explosive plays down the field, which is where Michael Penix comfortably was his best at Washington, was attacking deep routes, deep posts, goes, fades, all that kind of stuff. So what's going to happen when you get to the NFL? I didn't see a lot of confidence reading and processing over the middle of the field. And I didn't really see a lot in the way of anticipatory throws throwing to spots either. So you have a stylistic identity that I think clashes with what the league is doing right now. You have, I don't think, enough of a counter pitch off of that to take advantage if teams are just going to sit on you vertically to consistently attack and anticipate the middle of the field. He's got the arm to throw the comebacks and the outs to the field. And that's, I think, the most consistency that you saw him in the short game when it wasn't the screen game, which was really, as you mentioned, really well developed for Washington and really helped to be the counterpunch for them. Mm-hmm. The running game and the screen game. And then you don't have a lot of anticipatory throws, but you do have a longer delivery as well. And then you get really rattled under pressure. That whole collection of questions and riddles piled together, I think, has this compounding effect that I think makes Michael Penix Jr. a very challenging evaluation to have a lot of confidence in.
His throw sequencing is very different, right? I mean, like just the way that he sets his base, very wide
Sometimes
open.
He doesn't.
Right. He's very like wide open to the front side, I thought. And then just getting himself aligned to his targets is like not really a thing. Like he's very disjointed.
It's a lot of just and he's got the talent to do it
with a low arm, like a low release point too.
Right. But that limits your ability to pull the string on the ball.
Yeah.
And change the trajectory. So a lot of the trajectory of the throw comes in the same spot. And then when you got to hurry your process and it's all armed, the ball ends up coming out too hot, and guys in shorter areas of the field, it's not consistently placed where it needs to. And then they have trouble catching it as well.
By far the most misses on tape of any quarterback I've watched for this class is Penix Jr.
And that's of the 7 names that we've discussed.
Yeah.
And we're
the ones that matter, right?
Like, the perceived early guys. I would agree with that.
Oh, by the way, he's 24 years old. Real quick on the injury history: 2018 ACL tear, 2019 sternoclavicular joint injury, 2020 ACL tear is the same knee twice, 2021 AC joint shoulder injury, and then congratulations, he was healthy the last 2 years at Washington, which is big for him, right? That's why we're even talking about him. So, okay, let's get to Spencer Rattler here. 6 foot 211, 31-inch arms. Nobody cares about arm length for quarterbacks. RAS score of a 401, goes to Oklahoma to start his career. Consensus number 1 quarterback in 2019. Gets phased out of Oklahoma, goes to South Carolina, starts there for the last couple of seasons. Let's get into it, Kyle. What do you like about Spencer Rattler?
I like my quarterbacks to have gone through some stuff, right? And I think the last 3 names that we've talked about are guys that have all collectively gone through some stuff. Rattler's just happened to have had to go through his stuff last. He had the well-documented QB1 Netflix series stuff. Goes to Oklahoma, gets benched for Caleb Williams, plays at Oklahoma with all the successful players that they had there, and comes to South Carolina where they can't block anybody. Let's just be honest. They cannot block anybody up.
Dudes were past those offensive linemen before they could even get their get into their kick sling. It's horrible.
They can't even get 2 steps out of their stance, and they're already turning and chasing. So I admire that element of Spencer Rattler for having to navigate 2 seasons or 25 games of just constant pressure and duress and management of that. He's got a live arm. And I think the style of play that Spencer has envisioned for himself is one that allows him to circumvent taking sacks unless you're getting run right by, and still being able to access enough areas of the field that you're not playing within a very narrow funnel. I just still think the decision making is not consistent enough, and that's where I come back to for Spencer. The decision making, when to take an L on a play, the decision making of where to throw the ball. We're in the Florida game, and it's a 3 or a 4-point game in the final minute. We got the ball near midfield, and
first and 10,
and I got early inside pressure. And instead of just throwing the ball away, I fade off my back foot and throw it to the guy who stopped running his route with a high post player there and underthrow it by 20 yards for an interception and lose a football game. Stuff like that still being there. It's another one of those players where he's got 1,300 career passing attempts in college. Kind of feel like at this stage, you kind of are what you are. And I just think there's still too much variance for Spencer for him to ever iron that out for me to feel like he'd be a high-level starting quarterback in the NFL.
Spencer Rattler is a quarterback that plays the game with a lack of awareness to his own skill set. And
he's always tried to play like Kyler.
Yeah, man, it kind of frustrates me a lot. You mentioned a lot of the decision-making stuff, and I think a lot of that's rooted in how he kind of manages the pocket. He tends to drift quite a bit, and I think he thinks he has more escapability and more pocket movement than he really has, and he has a couple of good moments, right? It's not all bad, but there's not enough twitch and movement skills and intelligence with how he navigates the pocket that makes it hard for me to fathom. And then just kind of turning down profits, looking to push the ball down the field, just do the smart right thing with the football more, please. I think that would help you.
Mm-hmm.
That would help you not have, like, your offensive line was bad. Let's not stress them by being late with our throws and not going to areas of the field where we have an obvious chance to take the football. A little bit bouncy in the pocket. I think the ball placement is inconsistent. A lot of behind throws, like in breakers, like behind the targets.
Yeah.
Like not even like deep down the field. So you like the arm talent. You like that he's been through things. I think he's got an uphill climb.
To your point, from an athletic profile standpoint, this is a smaller player at 6 foot, 210 pounds. 20th percentile 40. Nobody cares about 40-yard dash in a quarterback, but it's worth acknowledging 20th percentile. And then the shuttles, right? When you're trying to navigate the pocket and make the first arriving rusher miss, and then get outside the pocket or get out on the edges of the defense. 28th percentile 3-cone drill and 42nd percentile short shuttle. For a player who has the style of play of dropping my eyes and looking to shake you out and then get outside. The least athletic quarterback of the four that we've talked about today.
And the top three.
And the least athletic of the 7 quarterbacks that we've discussed in deep dives on the show. I think is a fair assessment of Spencer. Also thought another thing for him was there were times where as Leggett emerged, and we'll talk Leggett at some point, but I've kind of disclosed to you, I came away from his film really blown away as a late stage breakout player, how good of a route runner I think he is. Felt like there were times where I know where my guy is, and I just want to work the ball to him and try to make a big play happen instead of, as you said, doing the smart right thing and managing completions and staying on schedule as an offense more often. And that at this point, we've heard, and I would generally agree, Spencer Rattler's a better player now than he was at Oklahoma. But in the scale and spectrum of projecting the leap to the next thing, I don't think this is going to fly.
You think these are the first 7 quarterbacks drafted?
I would not be surprised if they were not. Michael Pratt seems to have some likability. And it comes away from me being lower on Penix and Rattler than I think maybe I expected to be coming into the deep dive watches.
Yeah.
So I think that leaves the door open for a Michael Pratt, if you do the smart right thing, to maybe sneak in there and be like QB7.
Joe Milton?
No. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked on NFL Scouting. Kyle Crabbs, Joe Marino. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We appreciate you guys for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Enjoy the weekend. We are out of here, and we will be back again on Monday.